Hello and welcome to a new episode of Love of the Law. Today we're joined by Jennifer Amdur, partner at Berkowitz, Hanna, Amdur, and Wildstein. Jennifer takes us inside the complex world of birth injury litigation, breaking down how medical negligence can occur during pregnancy, labor, and delivery, and how her team investigates and handles these highly sensitive cases. We also discuss cerebral palsy claims, fetal monitoring, expert analysis, and what families should know if they suspect something went wrong during childbirth. All right, welcome back to the show. Jen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Monty. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for making time in your busy schedule to be a part of our show today. I know you all do a lot of amazing work over there. So, what specific common errors occur during labor and delivery that lead to birth injuries?
Sure. It's kind of a broad spectrum of topics, but I think that if you have to really boil it down, there's kind of three probably main areas. The first is prenatal care and treatment, right? So, really looking at whether mom and the baby are getting the appropriate prenatal monitoring. Are their ultrasounds being read appropriately? Are they getting non stress tests or watching the baby's heartbeat at appropriate intervals? Making sure really that they're treating with the appropriate providers. For example, some moms require a higher level of care during their prenatal period due to some sort of diagnosis that they may have, whether it be gestational diabetes or advanced maternal age or something of that nature, where they really require referral to a specialist, a maternal fetal medicine specialist, in order to really evaluate the pregnancy and make sure that it is moving along as it should. So, really, I think that prenatal period is kind of your one big umbrella of cases where they referred to the appropriate providers. Was the prenatal testing appropriate? Were they on the correct medications? Were they being treated appropriately? After that, you kind of have your those last couple weeks of pregnancy, which are still prenatal, but really those last few weeks of pregnancy where most women either maybe going into labor or are having delayed onset of labor. So those last few weeks of pregnancy, I would say really are the bulk of things. So moms often have a number of complaints as they head towards the end of their pregnancy, things like decreased fetal movement, issues with their amniotic fluid, it's high or it's low, they're not feeling as well, issues with swelling, which can be normal during pregnancy, but also can be a sign of other impending problems, high blood pressure or preeclampsia. All of these different diagnoses in those last few weeks tend to be more prevalent. So, those last few weeks, I think when we're evaluating a case, we're really seeing if mom has made it, into those, say, 36 weeks and beyond, did they have any complaints? And were those complaints properly addressed? So, for example, mom comes in with or concerns of decreased fetal movement. Were they given a non stress test? Was that non stress test reassuring? A non stress test is when they're actually looking at the baby's heartbeat and seeing if mom is having contractions. So, was the non stress test performed? Was it reactive? If so, was there any other concerns that the practitioner needed to deal with? Or if it was not fully reactive, if there were any concerns with that NST, then did they do any further workup, biophysical profile, ultrasound, admit for prolonged monitoring? And so really looking in those last few weeks, what complaints, many women have certain difficulties arise very natural during those last few weeks of pregnancy to have that happen. And when that does happen, were they addressed appropriately? And then I think, your third kind of main thing is mom is in labor or is being induced to go into labor. And during that process, many women, if not most at this time, are on continuous electronic fetal monitoring, which is a process where a band is put on mom's belly to see continuously the heartbeat of that baby and the contraction pattern of mom. And really evaluating that electronic fetal monitor, the fetal monitor strips, the heartbeat strips, because unfortunately, we see all too often that mom's having a labor 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours. And the strips start off really great. Baby looks wonderful on the monitor, very reassuring. But over the course of that labor, the strips start to show things that can be a sign of oxygen deprivation or fetal acidemia or fetal hypoxia. And that third big bulk of these cases and evaluating them is what happened during that labor period, and should there have been an intervention to deliver mom earlier by C-section or some other means of inducing the delivery more quickly.
And how do you prove that a doctor's deviation from the standard of care caused the injury?
Yeah, it's kind of a long process, right? So we have to look at a number of different things. And that's why when we have a new birth injury client reach out to us, I always advise them this is a multi specialty, multifaceted approach that we take to these cases. We truly get the medical records from the very beginning of pregnancy, often even before. We look at everything going on with that baby's prenatal period, making sure that everything was normal as far as their monitoring and the results of that monitoring. We then really focus on looking at the delivery itself, the labor itself, what occurred during that. Well, how did the baby present at the time of delivery? Was the baby in the NICU unit, so the neonatal intensive care unit? Was the baby depressed at birth? Was the baby breathing at birth? We really look at all of that. But then to actually prove causation, causation is a very interesting thing in birth injury cases. I think that we have kind of competing interests sometimes in this world about trying to prove every little thing. And I don't think that any single delivery necessarily can check every single box that this must have been proven directly from this. So it's a multifaceted approach. We often get experts from a neonatology expert. We would get experts in obviously obstetrics and gynecology or maternal fetal medicine. We often get placenta pathology experts to look at actually the placenta and make sure that the placenta was healthy at the time of birth to show that there was nothing that was going on throughout the pregnancy that would have caused this. We get neuroradiologists to look at the brain imaging if there is any of these babies. The reason for the pediatric neuroradiologists is that there are certain brain patterns which are more brain injury patterns. So actually you see the injury on the brain itself that can be more related to hypoxia, right? So lack of oxygen versus say an electrolyte abnormality versus say a genetic condition. So certain ways that the imaging actually shows the pattern of injury can be indicative of whether this was a birth injury versus some other cause. We get experts often sometimes in nursing, we get experts in pediatric neurology to kind of put everything together. So it really is kind of a puzzle. You need all of these pieces to say, hey, we had this mom who was pregnant. Prenatal care was moving along beautifully. She presented at 39 or 40 weeks to deliver this baby. No signs of issues or distress during that prenatal period. But then mom unfortunately had this really prolonged and protracted labor, many decelerations. So many times that the heart rate was showing that it was not moving along as it should during that labor period. Concerns for hypoxia went on for hours and hours, no intervention. Baby's born with low APGARs, not breathing, required resuscitation, had issues in the NICU unit, seizures. There's all sorts of things that we look to. When the seizures happen in these children is often correlated to when they had hypoxia. So when your seizures begin can kind of be back stepped sometimes to say, this falls within a period of time that's indicative of having oxygen deprivation during the labor period. So really it's a multifaceted approach. And then we take all of those experts, the placental pathologists, the neonatologists, the pediatric neurologists, the neuroradiologists, and say, hey, all of these puzzle pieces fit that this was an injury that happened, during that labor period. And we have all this evidence of a beautifully healthy baby leading up to this delivery. And much more likely than not, this was something that occurred in utero during that labor that was avoidable had the warning signs been taken up and mom been delivered.
Now let's pivot over to kind of the legal process, and you've already highlighted a lot of that so far. So, beginning with what is the statute of limitations for filing a birth injury lawsuit in the state of Connecticut?
Yeah. So in the state of Connecticut, the general malpractice statute of limitations is 2 years, no more than 3 years from when you knew or should have known about the injury. And so, as I kind of mentioned earlier, Connecticut has a very short statute of limitations compared to many other states for birth injury. And it's a little unfortunate because truly sometimes these kiddos, they start off depressed and need a lot of intensive care. They start to kind of catch up because modern medicine is amazing. But then at the time they get school age, they start to see that they actually do have severe deficits. They're not able to keep up with their peers cognitively. They're not able to keep up with speech. They're not able with their executive functioning, to always catch up. And so at that time, we've had calls from moms and parents whose children are in elementary school and it has all kind of come to fruition. And at that point, the statute has run. And so it is 2 years, no more than 3 years. There's an automatic, if you file it on time, 90-day extension of that statute, so we have a little wiggle room, but really mostly if you're concerned about something, consult with a lawyer as soon as possible because it is a short, short window in Connecticut. Other states, some of them are 10 years, 18 years. They give you a lot more time to let those children grow and see whether or not they have bad sequelae from a birth injury. Connecticut is not there yet, maybe one day. So we have to kind of move things quickly and see how, our clients do as they get older.
Now, how do you evaluate if a case should settle or proceed to trial?
That is a very case specific analysis, and it's not a cop out. It really is. There are so many factors determine whether or not a client should settle, consider settlement, or try a case. Some of those factors are very personal to the family, right? They need to move on, they need funds and available monies to care appropriately for their child. Sometimes they just don't want to have to go to court. Other clients can't wait for their day in court. They want that day in court. They need it. It's how they can get closure. Sometimes, and I say this often to clients, and again, I don't mean it, as a joke or as a cop out. Sometimes whether a case settles depends on how the defense has valued it, right? And that kind of seems silly, but I say to clients, my job would be really easy if I went to a mediation knowing how much money the other side had, right? I could just tell you ahead of time, go or don't go. But I don't know, right? And we don't know what offers we're going to get at a mediation. And sometimes whether a case settles really depends on whether the defendant appropriately and honestly evaluated the case, right? If a defendant has put substantial money on a case because it's worth substantial money, that conversation is really personalized to my clients. This is within a realm of reasonable or it's not. It's like, it's a decent offer, it's not a decent offer. Here are the pros and cons, here are the risks. But it also has to do with how our experts did, if they've been deposed already, how their experts did. Does the defendant doctor make a compelling witness or is there something else going on? And then there are other factors, cases where doctors have lost privileges or been fined, right? Those go into, hey, this is a really solid case. They better value it in such a way that they force us to settle, right? So it really kind of depends on so many factors. But I think the most important thing when you go to a mediation is being willing to have a really open and honest conversation with the attorney handling your case about what your goals are, not just monetarily, right? But goals about whether you are looking for a trial, whether you're looking to put closure, whether you have a number in your head, whether you don't, and then relying on your lawyer a bit to tell you what other similar cases have settled for and where this is settling in that range. But there's all sorts of things that can happen during the life of a case that could push you into settlement or say, hey, we should never ever settle this. Let's keep going. So it's a hard question to answer, but I think it's a really important point. And it's something that with my clients, I have that conversation all the time. Clients call me, clients ask to speak to me. They want to walk through it. They want to walk through that risk benefit analysis. And really that's a big part of my job.
Now, this also might be a really hard question to answer, this next one, so apologies in advance. But we're going to continue on the conversation about compensation. How do you calculate the long-term costs of a birth injury, including future care, therapies, and even lost earning capacity?
Sure. So again, it's individualized, but we actually, as part of our team, before when I was saying how do you prove causation that an injury is caused by a birth injury, labor, delivery, prenatal, post birth, whatever it may be, that's only kind of the liability and causation section of our damages or of our case rather. For damages, we also have other experts that we hire. So we're following along during the life of a case. Every time our client is going to the doctors, we're getting those medical records, we're reading them, we're analyzing them, we're sending them to our experts. We are tracking their educational progress, if they're in preschool or if they're in a daycare or if they're, old enough to be in kindergarten. So we're kind of tracking that along. We're looking at birth to 3 records and therapy records. So we're really trying to get a handle generally on what their medical needs are, whether it is, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, social, emotional therapies, whatever that may be. We're really keeping an eye on all of that. And then, as part of our process of hiring experts and really trying to understand the value of the case, we will often, if appropriate, hire a pediatric neuropsychologist to actually perform a pediatric neuropsych evaluation on our clients at once they get to a certain age. Some pediatric neuropsychologists want the children to be at least 3, some 3.5 or 4. So, depending upon the age of the child. And those pediatric neuropsychologists perform a battery of tests as if they were, part of a school system or part of a neurology workup where they're actually performing age appropriate neuropsychological testing to see how they compare to the same age peers, on a large spectrum of individuals to see how they are handling things visually, cognitively, executive functioning, etc. And then we also often have our clients evaluated by a pediatric neurologist. So we'll talk from the very beginning with a pediatric neurologist just about how their presentation at birth and how they did. But then they're often evaluated to see where they still may have low tone or spasticity in their muscles, where they have met milestones or not met milestones. And so we actually have these kids evaluated and come up with a report or just findings from an evaluation, depending upon the case. And then all of that gets sent often to a pediatric physiatrist. For those not familiar with a pediatric physiatrist, that's a doctor who's an MD doctor who is specialized in physical rehabilitation medicine. And so they then, do their own evaluation of our clients, these little kiddos, and look at them and see what likely medical needs they'll need in the future. And those physiatrists are relying on however many years of pediatric records we have from them, from everyone from therapists to neurologists, pediatricians, and their own evaluation. And they come up with predictions of likely future needs and the cost of those future needs. And then when all of that is done, it's sent to an economist who will put that back to the value at kind of present dollars and how much it will likely cost for that child's medical care in the future.
For my final question, this is kind of a good advice to leave us off with. What are the most crucial pieces of evidence to gather immediately after a birth injury?
The most critical pieces of information really is the medical record, but maybe the most critical piece often, not always, sometimes they're not at play, but often it's the fetal monitor tracings. So often the story of specifically a delivery case, the story is often told in those electronic fetal monitor tracings. So watching that baby's heart rate over the period of the labor is often where the whole story is, right? Lay people are not expected to be able to read fetal monitor tracings. No one really, they see it on a monitor. It kind of looks like a line going up and down. And so that's not something that we have any expectation that our clients, unless they happen to be in the medical profession, know anything about. And that is really often where much of the story lies. So the medical record is really the most critical. However, another thing that often is shockingly helpful, we are all on our phones, right? All the time. We are often texting mom or a friend or a husband or a partner or a wife or whomever it may be, different things like, hey, they told me I'm 3 centimeters dilated, but I've been this way for 6 hours. And there's such often an abundance of evidence in our phones, but many people have, their phones on auto delete. And so often when I'm meeting with a new client, I ask them right off the bat, hey, do you have any text messages? Because the medical records, unfortunately, are often not always very specific with timing, right? People write shift notes. So a shift could be 12 hours and they wrote one note. And so trying to know what happened during those 12 hours, often we're piecing that together through text messages or emails or phone calls. I know I called my partner when they told me I was in active labor, and that was at, 11:52. So it has become more and more throughout my, career of 14-ish years that the cell phone, as we've gotten so it's so ubiquitous with us, right? It's all the time. We're on it. We're texting little tiny things. Your best friend, "Hey, I'm heading to the hospital. I think my water broke." Those little things can be so incredibly important and give really good time specific data that medical records are often just do not have. And of course, when we take these depositions, oh, I don't remember, I don't recall, I don't know what time that happened. And so sometimes we can fill in those timelines really, really well with people's own evidence, their phone.
That's great advice. Thank you so much, Jennifer Amdur. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Monty. I appreciate it.